The Democratic Party is one of the two major contemporary political parties in the United States, along with the Republican Party, tracing its origins back to Thomas Jefferson's and James Madison's Democratic Republicans. The modern-day Democratic Party was founded around 1828. Making it the world's oldest active party. Once the cradle of classical liberalism and, to some extent, libertarianism in the United States, since the 1930s, the party has promoted a center-left social liberal platform, supporting social justice and a mixed economy. The Democrats' philosophy of modern American liberalism advocates social and economic equality, along with the welfare state. It pursues a mixed economy by providing government intervention and regulation in the economy. These interventions, such as the introduction of social programs, support for labor unions, moves toward universal health care and equal opportunity, consumer protection, and environmental protection, form the core of the party's economic policy. Well into the 20th century, the party had a conservative pro-business wing and attracted strong support from the European ethnics, most of whom Catholics, based in the major cities, and included a populist conservative and evangelical wing based in the rural South. After 1932 and Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, the business wing withered between the 1960s and the 1990s. Southern whites and many European ethnics moved into the Republican Party. Today, the Congressional Democratic Caucus is composed mostly of progressives and centrists, with a smaller minority of conservatives. There have been 15 Democratic presidents. The first was Andrew Jackson, who served from 1829 to 1837. The most recent is the current one, Barack Obama, the first African-American president, who has been in office since 2009. In the 114th Congress, following the 2014 elections, Democrats hold a minority of seats in the House of Representatives as well as in the Senate. The party also holds 18 governorships and control of a minority of state legislatures. History. The Democratic Party traces its origins to the inspiration of the Democratic Republican Party, founded by Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and other influential opponents of the Federalists in 1792. That party also inspired the Whigs and modern Republicans. Organizationally, the modern Democratic Party truly arose in the 1830s, with the election of Andrew Jackson. Since the division of the Republican Party in the election of 1912, which resulted in victory for Woodrow Wilson, the party has gradually positioned itself to the left of the Republican Party on social and economic issues. 1828 to 60, the Democratic Party evolved from the Jeffersonian Republican or Democratic Republican Party organized by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, in opposition to the Federalist Party of Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. The party favored republicanism, a weak federal government, states' rights, agrarian interests and strict adherence to the Constitution. It opposed a national bank, close ties to Great Britain, and business and banking interests. That party, the Democratic-Republican Party, came to power in the election of 1800. After the War of 1812, the Federalists virtually disappeared and the only national political party left was the Democratic-Republicans. The era of one-party rule in the United States, known as the era of good feelings, lasted from 1816 until the early 1830s, when the Whig Party became a national political group to rival the Democratic Republicans. The Democratic-Republican Party still had its own internal factions, however. They split over the choice of a successor to President James Monroe, and the party faction that supported many of the old Jeffersonian principles, led by Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren, became the modern Democratic Party. As Norton explains the transformation in 1828, Jacksonians believed the people's will had finally prevailed. Through a lavishly financed coalition of state parties, political leaders, and newspaper editors, a popular movement had elected the president. The Democrats became the nation's first well-organized national party. Untitled party organization became the hallmark of 19th-century American politics. Opposing factions led by Henry Clay helped form the Whig Party. The Democratic Party had a small but decisive advantage over the Whigs until the 1850s, when the Whigs fell apart over the issue of slavery. In 1854, angry with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, anti-slavery Democrats left the party and joined Northern Whigs to form the Republican Party. Behind the platforms issued by state and national parties stood a widely shared political outlook that characterized the Democrats. The Democrats represented a wide range of views but shared a fundamental commitment to the Jeffersonian concept of an agrarian society. They viewed the central government as the enemy of individual liberty. The 1824 corrupt bargain had strengthened their suspicion of Washington politics. Jacksonians feared the concentration of economic and political power. They believed that government intervention in the economy benefited special interest groups and created corporate monopolies that favored the rich. They sought to restore the independence of the individual, the artisan and the ordinary farmer, by ending federal support of banks and corporations and restricting the use of paper currency, which they distrusted. Their definition of the proper role of government tended to be negative, and Jackson's political power was largely expressed in negative acts. He exercised the veto more than all previous presidents combined. Jackson and his supporters also opposed reform as a movement. Reformers eager to turn the programs into legislation called for a more active government. But Democrats tended to oppose programs like educational reform amid the establishment of a public education system. They believed, for instance, that public schools restricted individual liberty by interfering with parental responsibility and undermined freedom of religion by replacing church schools. Nor did Jackson share reformers' humanitarian concerns. He had no sympathy for American Indians, initiating the removal of the Cherokees along the Trail of Tears. 1860s. The Democrats split over the choice of a successor to President James Buchanan along northern and southern lines. Factions of the party provided two separate candidacies for president in the election of 1860, in which the Republican Party gained ascendancy. Southern Democrats, after some delegates followed the lead of the Fire Eaters by walking out of the Democratic Convention at Charleston's Institute Hall in April 1860, and were subsequently joined by those who, once again led by the Fire Eaters, left the Baltimore Convention the following June when the convention would not adopt a resolution supporting extending slavery into territories whose voters did not want it. Nominated the pro-slavery incumbent Vice President, John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, for president and General Joseph Lane, former governor of Oregon, for vice president. The Northern Democrats proceeded to nominate Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois for president and former governor of Georgia Herschel V. Johnson for vice president, while some Southern Democrats joined the Constitutional Union Party, backing its nominees. Former Senator, Speaker of the House, and Secretary of War John Bell of Tennessee for president, and the politician, statesman, and educator Edward Everett of Massachusetts for vice president. This fracturing of the Democrats led to a Republican victory, and Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. As the American Civil War broke out, Northern Democrats were divided into War Democrats and Peace Democrats. The Confederate States of America, whose political leadership, mindful of the welter prevalent in antebellum American politics and with a pressing need for unity, largely viewed political parties as inimical to good governance. Consequently, the Confederacy had none, or at least none with the wide organization inherent to other American parties. Most War Democrats rallied to Republican President Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans' National Union Party in the election of 1864, which featured Andrew Johnson on the Republican ticket even though he was a Democrat from the South. Johnson replaced Lincoln in 1865, but stayed independent of both parties. The Democrats benefited from white Southerners' resentment of Reconstruction after the war and consequent hostility to the Republican Party. After Redeemers ended Reconstruction in the 1870s, and following the often extremely violent disenfranchisement of African Americans led by such white supremacist Democratic politicians as Benjamin Tillman of South Carolina in the 1880s and 1890s, the South, voting Democratic, became known as the Solid South, though Republicans won all but 2 presidential elections. The Democrats remained competitive. The party was dominated by pro-business suburban Democrats led by Samuel J. Tilden and Grover Cleveland, who represented mercantile, banking, and railroad interests, opposed imperialism and overseas expansion, fought for the gold standard, opposed bimetallism, and crusaded against corruption, high taxes, and tariffs. Cleveland was elected to non-consecutive presidential terms in 1884 and 1892. 1900s agrarian Democrats demanding free silver overthrew the Bourbon Democrats in 1896 and nominated William Jennings Bryan for the presidency. Bryan waged a vigorous campaign attacking East and moneyed interests, but he lost to the Republican William McKinley. The Democrats took control of the House in 1910 and elected Woodrow Wilson as president in 1912 and 1916. Wilson effectively led Congress to put to rest the issues of tariffs, money, and antitrust, which had dominated politics for 40 years, with new progressive laws. The Great Depression in 1929 that occurred under Republican President Herbert Hoover and the Republican Congress set the stage for a more liberal government. The Democrats controlled the House of Representatives nearly uninterrupted from 1930 until 1994 and won most presidential elections until 1968. Franklin D. Roosevelt, elected to the presidency in 1932, came forth with government programs called the New Deal. New Deal liberalism meant the regulation of business and the promotion of labor unions, as well as federal spending to aid to the unemployed, help distressed farmers, and undertake large-scale public works projects. It marked the start of the American welfare state. The opponents, who stressed opposition to unions, support for business, and low taxes, started calling themselves conservatives. Until the 1980s, the Democratic Party was a coalition of 2 parties divided by the Mason-Dixon line: liberal Democrats in the North and conservatives in the South. The polarization grew stronger after Roosevelt died. Southern Democrats formed a key part of the bipartisan conservative coalition in an alliance with most of the Midwestern Republicans. The economically activist philosophy of Franklin D. Roosevelt, which has strongly influenced American liberalism, shaped much of the party's economic agenda after 1932. From the 1930s to the mid-1960s, the Liberal New Deal coalition usually controlled the presidency while the Conservative coalition usually controlled Congress. Issues facing parties in the United States after World War II included the Cold War and the Civil Rights Movement. Republicans attracted conservatives and white Southerners from the Democratic coalition with their use of the Southern strategy and resistance to New Deal and Great Society liberalism. African Americans had traditionally supported the Republican Party because of the anti-slavery policies of Abraham Lincoln and the civil rights policies of his successors, such as Ulysses S. Grant. But they began supporting Democrats following the ascent of the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration, the New Deal, the integration of the military and embrace of proposed civil rights legislation by President Harry Truman in 1947-48, and the post-war civil rights movement. The Democratic Party's main base of support shifted to the Northeast, marking a dramatic reversal of history. Modern-era Bill Clinton was elected to the presidency in 1992, labeling himself and governing as a New Democrat. The party adopted a centrist economic and socially progressive agenda, with the voter base having shifted considerably to the right. Democrats began to advocate for more social justice, affirmative action, a balanced budget, and a market economy tempered by government intervention. The economic policy adopted by the Democratic Party, including the former Clinton administration, has been referred to as Third Way. The Democratic Party lost control of Congress in the election of 1994 to the Republican Party. Re-elected in 1996, Clinton was the first Democratic president since Franklin Roosevelt to be elected to 2 terms. Following 12 years of Republican rule, the Democratic Party regained majority control of both the House and the Senate in the 2006 elections. Some of the party's key issues in the early 21st century in their last national platform have included the methods of how to combat terrorism, homeland security, expanding access to health care, labor rights, environmentalism, and the preservation of liberal government programs. Barack Obama was elected president in 2008, and the party swept to power nationwide amidst the 2007 economic recession. Democrats under the Obama presidency moved forward reforms including an economic stimulus package, the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act, and the Affordable Care Act. In the 2010 elections, the Democratic Party lost control of the House and lost its majority in state legislatures and state governorships. The 2012 elections re-elected President Obama, but the party kept its minority in the House of Representatives. Later, in 2014, the party lost control of the Senate for the first time since 2006. According to a Pew Research poll, the Democratic Party has become more socially liberal and secular compared to how it was in 1987. Based on a poll conducted in 2014, Gallup found that 30% of Americans identified as Democrats, 23% as Republicans, and 45% as independents. In the same poll, a survey of registered voters stated that 47% identified as Democrats or leaned towards the party. The same poll found that 40% of registered voters identified as Republicans or leaned towards the Republican Party. Democratic presidents' recent electoral history: name and symbols. Initially calling itself the Republican Party, Jeffersonians were labeled Democratic by the opposition Federalists, with the hope of stigmatizing them as purveyors of democracy or mob rule. By the Jacksonian era, the term, the democracy, was in use by the party. The name, Democratic Party, was eventually settled upon and became the official name in 1844. Members of the party are called Democrats, or Dems. The term, Democrat Party, has also been in local use but has usually been used by opponents since 1952 as an epithet. The most common mascot symbol for the party has been the donkey, or jackass. Andrew Jackson's enemies twisted his name to jackass as a term of ridicule regarding a stupid and stubborn animal. However, the Democrats liked the common man implications and picked it up too, so the image persisted and evolved. Its most lasting impression came from the cartoons of Thomas Nast from 1870 in Harper's Weekly. Cartoonists followed Nast and used the donkey to represent the Democrats, and the elephant to represent the Republicans. In the early 20th century, the traditional symbol of the Democratic Party in Midwestern states such as Indiana, Kentucky, Oklahoma and Ohio was the rooster, as opposed to the Republican eagle. This symbol still appears on Oklahoma, Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia ballots. In New York, the Democratic ballot symbol is a 5-pointed star. For the majority of the 20th century, Missouri Democrats used the Statue of Liberty as their ballot emblem. This meant that, when Libertarian candidates received ballot access in Missouri in 1976, they could not use the Statue of Liberty. their national symbol, as the ballot emblem. Missouri Libertarians instead used the Liberty Bell until 1995, when the mule became Missouri's state animal. From 1995 to 2004, there was some confusion among voters, as the Democratic ticket was marked with the Statue of Liberty and the Libertarians' mule was easily mistaken for a Democratic donkey. Although both major political parties use the traditional American colors of red, white, and blue in their marketing and representations, since election night 2000, blue has become the identifying color for the Democratic Party, while red has become the identifying color for the Republican Party. That night, for the first time, all major broadcast television networks used the same color scheme for the electoral map: blue states for Al Gore and red states for George W. Bush. Since then, the color blue has been widely used by the media to represent the party. This is contrary to common practice outside of the United States, where blue is the traditional color of the right and red the color of the left. For example, in Canada, red represents the Liberals, while blue represents the Conservatives. In the United Kingdom, red denotes the Labour Party and blue symbolizes the Conservative Party. Blue has also been used both by party supporters for promotional efforts, Act Blue, Buy Blue, Blue Fund, as examples, and by the party itself in 2006 both for its Red to Blue program, created to support Democratic candidates running against Republican incumbents in the midterm elections that year, and on its official website. In September 2010, the Democratic Party unveiled its new logo, which featured a blue D inside a blue circle. It was the party's first official logo, as the donkey logo had only been semi-official. Jefferson-Jackson Day is the annual fundraising event held by Democratic Party organizations across the United States. It is named after Presidents Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, whom the party regards as its distinguished early leaders. The song, "Happy Days Are Here Again," is the unofficial song of the Democratic Party. It was used prominently when Franklin D. Roosevelt was nominated for president at the 1932 Democratic National Convention and remains a sentimental favorite for Democrats today. For example, Paul Shaffer played the theme on The Late Show with David Letterman after the Democrats won Congress in 2006. "Don't Stop" by Fleetwood Mac was adopted by Bill Clinton's presidential campaign in 1992, and has endured as a popular Democratic song. Also, the emotionally similar song, "Beautiful Day," by the band U2 has become a favorite theme song for Democratic candidates. John Kerry used the song during his 2004 presidential campaign, and several Democratic congressional candidates used it as a celebratory tune in 2006. Aaron Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man is traditionally performed at the beginning of the Democratic National Convention.